This conversation with Thomas J. Cleary is part of the James J. Blanchard Living Library of Michigan Political History, a project of the Michigan Political History Society. Hi, I'm Larry Lee. I'm retired Vice President of Gongwer News Service. Today, we're here to talk with Thomas Cleary, who was a political history important figure in Michigan because he founded the first multi-client lobbying firm in Michigan Legislative Consultants. Before that, he was deputy to the last elected treasurer of the state of Michigan under the prior constitution, and in that role, one of the few people still around who served under a prior constitution. So his story, though, begins in the Upper Peninsula, where he was raised and where his father introduced him to politics. So let's start there. Tom, let's talk about what your life was like up there with your father and learning politics.
Well, thank you, Larry. The main point I need to make is starting out, I have to talk about my father because we were a political family in that my dad was county Democratic chairman from 1929 until he died in 1953 on Mackinac Island. And as county Democratic chairman in the 30s and in the 40s, the UP was very Democratic. Our 15 counties had chairmen that were all mostly of Irish descent, okay? And so I just grew up in that kind of a condition. I would say as an aside, in the 30s and 40s. In the 30s, a very important political figure, Governor Frank Murphy, former mayor of Detroit, was governor of Michigan, and then went on to become a attorney general under President Roosevelt, and also a United States Supreme Court justice under President Roosevelt. Anyway, he visited our family home when I was 4 years old to campaign in the 30s. And I guess that was my start of real exposure and understanding. And I had the opportunity to watch my dad as he fulfilled his duties as the chair of the county and as a leader in the Upper Peninsula Democrats. My dad never ran for anything. He always liked to be the county chair. But in that process, he never asked for anything. The only thing he ever enjoyed having was appointment to the Mackinac Island State Park Commission. And he served those appointment of Governor Frank Murphy. Later on, Governor Van Wagner appointed him, reappointed him to the commission. And finally, Governor Williams appointed him. And that's how we got our family interest in Mackinac Island.
Your family was interested in the island. You were interested in keeping your family in touch with the UP. You went there for vacations for decades, as taking your whole family up there.
Well, and then in that process, I became interested in government. I really did, and in politics.
And how was it that at 4, the visit from Governor Murphy attracted your interest that you could remember this now?
No, it's all
family
a
stories?
review of history.
Okay.
Obviously, I had no concept of what was going on at the age of 4.
Right.
But as I look back and review, I can now see that just observing my father and how he operated and how he did things, my goodness, he was a World War II veteran, served in France, and very committed. My 3 older brothers served in World War II, one in the Army, one in the Navy, and one in the Marine Corps. And then later on, I served in the Air Force during the Korean War. So anyway, family was committed to my dad was committed to veterans, volunteered in the American Legion as Veterans Affairs, and and things of that nature. So in my own case, I graduated from Escanaba High School in 1950. Did not go to college right away, went into the United States Air Force for 4 years, and got out in the service in 1954, went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, and then moved back to Escanaba.
And you got a degree in business administration at Marquette. And what did you think you were going to do with that?
I was going back to Escanaba and probably get involved locally in politics and live my life there. Things changed.
Things change. You also met Barbara and married your wife.
Yeah, actually, we started our family while I was midway in college. So we had a son, Michael, in Milwaukee, and got back home and had a son, John, our second child, while we were in Escanaba. So anyway, I moved back to Escanaba, got involved politically as part of the county Democratic Party, and met candidates as they came campaigning in Escanaba, and this is in 1958. Well, my life got changed. In 1959, I'd been a year in Escanaba, doing okay. I was with the Prudential Insurance Company, active locally, politically. And I got a call from Sanford Brown, who was the state treasurer of Michigan, who I had met a couple of times.
You had already met him as part of that whole family upbringing.
Right, in his campaigning in the Escanaba area. So anyway, he called and he said, "Tom, I'd like you to think about being my deputy in the deputy state treasurer." I thought, whoa, that's interesting. So anyway, went over to Drummond Island, had an interview. He had a summer cottage there. And lo and behold, I accepted the appointment as deputy state treasurer. This is in June of 1959. So moved the family and
down to Lansing.
Down to Lansing. And, it was an interesting period in my life. And I had the opportunity to learn more about state government and more about the state political process. In the 6 years I was deputy in the state treasurer to the last elected state treasurer. The state treasurer, of course, is part of a governor's cabinet.
Correct.
And I served 2 years, the last term of Governor Williams, Governor Swainson's 1 2-year term, and then Governor Romney. And by that time of Governor Romney, those last 2 years as deputy and the treasurer, was really during a period of the implementation of the 1963 Constitution.
Hugely important period of Michigan political history.
Right. And a huge, important part of my life.
Of your life.
Yeah, because for all intents and purposes, the voters kicked me out. And
so
let me explain why that happened or how it happened. Up until the 1963 Constitution, we had an elected state treasurer, nominated by political party. And the 63 Constitution changed that. And the state treasurer's job became appointed by the governor. Well, Governor Romney was a Republican. Sandy Brown was a Democrat. I was a Democrat. And it was time for this political appointee to move on to something else.
Before we do that, though, talk a little bit about what you did as deputy, how that shaped some of the information that you developed about government and how it worked.
Yeah, I'll answer that, Larry, but first let me emphasize that the last 2 years in that period with Governor Romney was really the implementation period of the 63 Constitution. But having served as the state treasurer, deputy state treasurer. And let me put it in perspective. Prior to the '63 Constitution, the state treasurer's job was to collect the money and pay the bills. Okay, and there was 128 agencies that reported to the governor. Okay, and we had about, I'd say, 100 employees.
By comparison, the 128 in the new Constitution gets shrunk down to
21
just 20.
Yeah, right. And we didn't have to deal with enforcement or anything like that. Just collect the money, deposit it in the bank, and pay the bills, and keep track of it that way. But you have an elected state treasurer who's part of the administrative board. Okay, and if the state treasurer was out or not available, the deputy would represent him at meetings and things of that nature.
Where contracts were decided,
Oh, yeah.
all kinds of just operational.
It gave me an opportunity to see how state government worked. It really did. And I was interested in that. It also gave me an opportunity, because you were the non-civil service #2 person in the Treasury. It gave me an opportunity to be part of the Democratic team. We had an elected state treasurer, an elected secretary of state, an elected attorney general, elected highway commissioner, an auditor general, a superintendent of public instruction. And these were all part of the state administrative board.
Right.
That fulfilled the contracts and committee meetings and what have you.
And cabinet meetings that you also did weekly.
Oh, yeah. Well, Governor Williams would have a press conference twice a day. And we would meet, the cabinet would meet every day at 9 o'clock in the morning with the governor, just to review what was going on, and it'll only take about 10, 15 minutes. But that was an important process for me in understanding how state government worked, okay? And I enjoyed that. But the other part of it was the political part of it. You're working for an elected state official, and you're all part of the Democratic team, okay? And you're coordinated as part of the team, and you run as part of a team. You're not individually out there, you know. So that I had an opportunity to be involved with the Democratic Party statewide. As an aside, I had the opportunity to be a delegate in 1960 when John Kennedy was nominated president, to go out to California and be part of that convention. So that was all part of my interest in training and what have you. And then we come to, during that period of time, my family was growing. And I stopped for a minute to talk about my family.
By now you had several children.
I had, I believe, 5 children by the time I was through with my career with the Treasurer's office, okay? Today I'm fortunate enough I had 9 children. One has since passed away. I've got 22 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren. I'm all very proud of them all. Most of them live in the Lansing area and are close by, so it makes for a very interesting family life. But putting that into context.
And you're very close to the family. Some are in politics, sort of, and some are not. Some are less interested.
Yeah. So anyway, we come to the Romney era. We've got a new constitution, okay? The Treasurer's office is split up, and we now have a legislative auditor general rather than an elected auditor general. We have an appointed state treasurer rather than an elected state treasurer. And it took 1.5 years or so to implement the changes.
Right. Adopted in 63 in a special election.
Yeah,
And then, sure, then you go along. The first election that it affected 1964.
yeah.
So 1965, Tom Cleary is looking at, now what?
What am I going to do?
What am I
I've
gonna
got
do?
5 children, okay? I kind of like it. My wife and family like it in Lansing. I kind of like it in Lansing. So I had an opportunity to, and I thought about it. I think I'll give lobbying a chance.
Was that so automatic a decision, though? I mean, you could have stayed in government too, in some role, I assume, with your knowledge, even though it was even though it was partisan. Doesn't naturally seem like you would say, "Let me give lobbying a try," when
That's a
it's a
good
risk.
point. It's a good.
It's a
Well,
risk.
absolutely. I did not think about staying in state government. Well, you know, you're a Democratic appointee, and now you have a Republican governor, and you're going to have a Republican appointment. So, right, it's a good point, Larry. And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought, well, I've got the experience. I understand government. I understand politics. Okay. I think I'll give lobbying a try, see how it works. Talked it over with my wife and family and said, you know, let's give it a try. And I had one client to start off with, and went on from there.
And that client,
That client,
that client,
the first client, Larry, was dog racing.
right.
And I had a contract for a year, and we had it's interesting, in 65, in first part of 65 when I was started, we had a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, and of course Governor Romney.
Governor Romney.
There was a syndicate, a group of respected investors who wanted to get the law changed to permit dog racing in Michigan. Well, there were other groups that wanted dog racing also. But anyway, and we were not successful in that attempt.
That attempt never was successful in
No,
Michigan.
right. And
And so,
well, and there are 2 reasons why dog racing was not accepted. The evangelical churches in Michigan were opposed to dog racing because it was an expansion of gambling, okay? And also, the horse racing industry was exposed to gambling because they didn't want the competition
Right.
of dog racing.
it was basically the only legal gambling we had.
Right. To this day, there's no dog racing
There's
in
no dog
Michigan.
racing.
And for a number of years, there has not been any attempt.
Yeah.
In fact, the biggest attempt right now is to preserve horse racing. So, but anyway, that was my first year, my opportunity to get my feet wet. The head guy of this investment group that I worked for was Win Schuler, and he was a fun guy to work with. Okay.
Owner of a famous restaurant in Marshall, Michigan.
Right, and it was still there. And we'd take groups of lawmakers over to Marshall to talk to Win and to get a feel for what we're trying to do and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But it also gave me a chance to get my feet wet as a lobbyist.
Right, and so what you did was not just decide to become a lobbyist, you essentially created something Michigan didn't have before, which was a multi-client lobbyist,
Right.
rather than a lobbyist for one entity, one group.
And I really didn't think that through, that that's what I was doing, but that is in fact what I did. And at that time, big lobbying efforts, if you had a big problem, you probably hired a law firm in Lansing, okay? But there were associations coming into the lobbying field, okay, that wanted to get involved and didn't really know how to go about it. And so I had an opportunity to, in the first two or 3 years, to do lobbying work with associations. And they often didn't understand government at all. And to me, it was a great opportunity to kind of teach groups that hired you, well, now wait a minute. Tell me about what you're concerned about and what you expect from the legislature. And are you looking for a lobbyist just to protect your interests? Or are you looking for a lobbyist to accomplish something, to get a bill passed or to achieve something? So I found that opportunity to teach leadership of associations how government worked.
And that was a niche that other people who called themselves lobbyists didn't do at the time, to do work with associations and organizations in some role.
That's correct.
An administrator or...
And it took about 3 to 5 years to pick up and have 4 or 5 clients, okay? And then to really see if I was going to stay in it. And it worked out.
Right, but a couple of things. I mean, it must have been a bit of a struggle.
It was a big struggle.
Big struggle. And what are you telling, what are you reassuring your prospective clients with your new guy in town? They don't know whether you're going to be around or not, really.
Yeah. Well, and they were, to begin with, they were smaller groups, okay? And I had to grow and I had to teach. I had to take clients and say, no, that's not realistic what you want. Let's see if we can bring that down a little bit, and maybe if you get part of what you want the first year, you can come back later and see how that works. And one of the things that I felt very strongly about when I represented an association was that it was in partnership with that group, and I expected them to take the time to talk to their own local lawmaker to let them know what they were interested in and to establish a relationship. Because if you're representing a group, Larry, and you have people that are taking the time to let their lawmaker know at the local level what they're interested in and what they want and what they expect, it's very helpful. I mean, you can be in Lansing as a lobbyist, but if the lawmaker says to you, well, Mary Ann back home says this, and that's pretty much what you've been saying, I can go along with that, and that sort of thing.
Right.
And it doesn't take too many contacts locally to get a lawmaker to say, ooh, if there's 4 or 5 people talking to me about that issue, there's probably a lot more the same way that haven't talked to me, so I better pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah, so talk about how you developed your whole approach to what lobbying should be, and you've also talked about lifestyle things that you had to adjust as you went into this to get credibility.
Yeah. To start with, I had a philosophy, and then I still believe it, that the lawmaking process is very respectable and very important, because we have elected officials to do collectively for us what we can't do for ourselves, like the building of roads and the universities and the education, okay? Now, in that process, there are proposals that are made in the legislative process, and I strongly feel that if there's an issue out there that's controversial, it's very important that all the different points of view be expressed in that process, okay? If the lawmakers have all the points of view projected, they usually make good decisions, okay? And oftentimes they'll say, well, we're not ready for that. Or, yeah, it's a good idea, but where's the money going to come from? And of course, the budget process is very important in this whole process. So the lobbyist's job is really to sort through and to help your client, be it a company, be it a hospital, whatever, to understand the process, okay, and to be involved in that process. And actually, in many ways, to help the lawmakers really understand how they're going to be affected, and how society's going to be effective. So,
All part of that teaching you talk about.
yeah, that was the challenge, I thought, and I enjoyed it. I did it for 30 years. The first 15 years I did it by myself. Okay, and it got to the point that I really couldn't serve the clients just by myself. I needed to expand, what have you.
Well, I think especially when you're doing the association part of it plus the lobbying part of it. And you had clients going way back that both of that. I mean,
That are still with the firm.
still with the firm. Some who were a long time with the firm, like the broadcasters, who did a lot with that.
And McDonald's
Right.
and
McDonald's.
the
right.
judges and you know, it became a very interesting occupation. It
Right.
really did.
And you had to deal with things that lobbyists prior to you didn't deal with, which is conflicts between a client you might have and one you might be looking at.
Yeah.
How did you deal
Yeah,
with that?
very good point, good point. What you're talking about is potential conflicts of interest.
Correct.
Or conflicts of interest that right off the bat you say, hey, I can't take you as a client because I represent this client.
Correct.
Okay. But always, whenever there was a prospective client and I was being interviewed or talked about, I would review for myself and for that prospect, here's who I represent. Are there any conflicts of interest here that you can see? Okay. So I would try to, early on, determine whether there was a conflict or what have you. The other thing that was so important for our firm, and actually for any firm in the lobbying business, is credibility. What do the lawmakers think of you or of your firm? Are you honest to deal with, and things of that nature. And I was very proud to say over the years, our firm developed a very respected reputation, okay, within both parties. So I never had a problem. I had a Democratic background, of course,
Right.
but I could work very well with each party, okay.
Because what you were dealing with were the interests of your client.
That's right. That's right. And teaching the client
Right.
and making them a part of the process and getting them involved. Okay. And I would never, as a lobbyist, very seldom testify on a bill or anything. We would always get the client to bring in their best people to explain what they wanted or why they're opposed and that sort of thing. And here you get back to what I always have felt. If all the points of view are expressed on any given issue, the lawmakers usually make the right decision. So that's...
And you talk about the credibility of the firm, Michigan Legislative Consultants. Yeah. What's the biggest risks as you look back that could have undermined that credibility, and you didn't? You preserved the credibility of the firm.
Honesty. Mm-hmm. No shady deals or anything like that. There's all kinds of lawmakers. You get to know the good ones and the bad ones and that sort of thing. And you work with leadership in the party and or leadership in the legislative process, and you're very careful about who comes into your firm, and what there's some clients you would not take under any circumstance.
Because?
Oh, for a variety of reasons. Probably because they were wheeler-dealer type clients that you would rather not be involved with.
Which almost leads into there's so much money in politics, and one of the things you have to be very clear about is you can't expect to vote because of any money considerations.
Oh, that's right, absolutely. When you have a relationship with a client, it would be illegal to have a contract or a relationship based on your compensation, depending on whether you do or don't get something passed, or you do or don't kill a bill. That's a no-no.
Right.
You know, you put your reputation out there, and if they want to hire you, and you do the best you can, and it served us well. But anyway, as we grew, about the halfway point, after 15 years, it was quite obvious to me I had to expand, get some people in. And the firm did. We hired a couple of people over the next 15 years, and the firm has grown, and they're still around, and we're very satisfied. And
You're very proud of what that firm is.
yeah, I did. And 50 years later, the firm is still in business.
Did celebrate its 50th anniversary.
Yeah, a couple of years ago. And it has grown and grown and grown.
Right.
But it's a good firm.
First you hired Fritz Benson to help out, and then Mike Bush, a Republican, your first.
Yeah, hired those two, and the firm grew, and the reputation grew, and there we are.
Right. When we talk about political history, more we seem to focus on elected officials or of that nature, but lobbying is part of political history. Talk about how you view lobbying within Michigan's political history.
I guess I would say it this way. There's a lot of different players in the making of laws, okay? There's the elected officials themselves, the legislators, okay? But there are interest groups, okay? There are companies that are affected, okay? There are associations that are affected. There are, too often, when a proposal is being considered, there's winners and losers. And you have to be very careful that you get all the points of view involved. So anyway, in the lawmaking process, you have interest groups, you have lobbyists, you have elected officials, you have citizens, okay? It's just, it's an interesting process, and I found it to be a good process. There's no saying you don't want to watch the making of sausage or the making of laws.
Right.
But you have to get involved.
Yeah.
You have to get involved.
It can get messy.
Oh, it can get very messy. Well, and here, Larry, the media is a part of this, okay, a very important part of this. And if we didn't have the media reporting what's going on, the good and the bad, we wouldn't know. Now, over the years, as you know better than I do, when you first started, it was the print media that was really was where you got the depth of understanding of what was going on. And then you got television, and then you got radio, and now today you got the social media and all the other stuff that I can't keep track of, but it's...
Thankfully you have Barb, your wife, who does keep track of it.
Right.
And so you've seen lobbying change dramatically from
Yeah.
when you started this venture until, I mean, now we have 3,000 or more registered lobbyists back when you started.
The truth of the matter is most political issues involve money, one way or the other,
Right.
if you trace it through. And it's expensive to run for office, okay? And I have great respect for the lawmakers. Have to be able to raise money and not promise anything except good government as a recipient of that money. And of course, all too often, interest groups give money because they want something. Okay, well, it's a fine line.
Right.
But it can be balanced. We've seen it over and over again.
And we saw the whole development of fundraisers in Lansing that all week long where lobbyists it was almost you had to go.
Yeah, but that's part of the process.
Yeah.
And so we live with that, but that's, that whole attitude. But we have to end up with the process I'm talking about, where all the points of view are gathered in, and all the players get an opportunity to have their say, and then you live with the results, so to speak.
And another role that you evolved into fulfilling was advising your clients if they had a PAC. Most of them
yeah.
probably. How do you do that? Talk about that part.
Well, right. There's two ways to be involved with a client. You can help them locally at home, knocking on doors and being involved in their campaign, or you can give them money or raise money for them. Okay, but we don't have public funding of our legislative campaigns or what have you. So you've got to raise the money to get your message out, to what you're about, what you're trying to do. Okay, and we go from there. One of the things that's always talked about is disclosure. Okay, you can give money to somebody, but a candidate has to and should report where they get their money. Okay, so that everybody knows who's involved in the process and how and why and what have you. And all too often, as we know in today's world, corporations can give money, and some kind of money doesn't have to be disclosed and what have you. And this is a messy process that we have to sort through. So anyway.
Yeah. And do you have any sense of where lobbying is headed?
No, we're always going to have lobbyists, okay, of some kind.
I think you described that as part of the First Amendment, actually.
Yeah, right. I mean,
How you petition government.
that's right. So, we know a lot of people that are involved in government, that you're in government for a while and then you go out and you're a lobbyist, but you're part of the process. You're part of the process, and it's not going to change.
Right.
And it's a great process, and I've enjoyed it. I respect it. I watch it, and I'm interested in it.
You're still interested in politics?
Well, of course, as you know, I do it through involvement with the Political History Society, because it's important to know political history, the past. If you know the past, you got experience, and maybe you won't make the same mistake again.
Yeah.
So that's, I find that very interesting.
And what you did, you took an idea by Kevin Kelly to have a library, but really made some bones to it to establish a political history library here in Michigan.
Right. And you're involved in it?
Many of your own books form the core of this, and other donated books.
Right. It's all part of the big picture.
Right, because that does reflect your interest. And
yeah, I will always have that interest, and like you said, and that's my children are interested, and that's because they're part of the family.
right,
Like I learned it from my father, they're learning it from our family. So
Where you had dinner table conversations growing up about politics. You expose your children to much the same?
you know, your children learn even if you don't say anything.
Yeah.
They see what you do and what you're involved in, and that's good. That's good. And here again, I'm so pleased that I was able to have 9 children and grandchildren and enjoy that for the last 20 years. So it's been a good life, Larry.
It has been. And you met all these political figures, not just Governor Murphy, but Soapy, Senator Hart,
John Swainson.
governors.
Congressmen, and interesting state lawmakers. You and I had a mutual friend in Bill Ryan, who was Speaker of the House for years. And
Transcendent kind of leader, yeah.
you know, and it's interesting because you have this all these elected officials. They're representative of society. Okay, they're no more different. You have good lawmakers, bad lawmakers, boy, girl, and what have you. And it's just now it's interesting. We're finally coming to the point that women are getting respected in the way they should, elected to office and what have you.
And in the lobbying corps?
In the lobbying corps and at all levels, judicial corps.
MLC has women in its firm.
Well, that's good. That's good. For all too long, it was just a man's world. Well, we're increasing. So I'm very hopeful about the future.
Well, this has been fun, Tom.
Yeah, very satisfying.
That's pretty good. Thank you very much. This has been a great conversation about lobbying in Michigan and a multi-client inventor here with us today, Tom Cleary. Thank you.
Thank you.